This podcast may not be suitable for young listeners.
Steve Lilly, Episode 16. The Open Door. The coyote lapped water from the ditch, never lowering her eyes, alert, ready to pounce on a meal or run for her life. She was in unfamiliar territory and alone. Her mate had been caught in a trap weeks ago. She waited for the male to come, but it stayed and it fought the trap until it was exhausted, and then she lay beside him and waited, not comprehending the reason they had stopped. He was her mate for life, and she was loyal. The men came just before dark, and she had to get a distance between her and the men, and when the men surrounded her mate, she paced and whined at a distance where she wouldn't be detected, as she watched the men pin the male's head to the ground and then shove it in a cage, and they left. She paced back and forth for hours with anxiety, now being alone, before returning to the place where the male had fought the trap. She remained close to his scent for days until hunger was stronger than her loyalty, and she had to hunt, and she came back to the scent and waited longer. There was no emotion in her instinct to leave. The male was not coming back, and a million years of inherited instinct drove her on for days, until she stopped and howled into the blackness and collected a census of her kind in a new land that she did not know. Others did not answer, so she stayed and dug out a den to have her litter. The pups were now a week old, and she left them so she could eat, to keep her strength. The most powerful instinct of all is survival. It was new territory, but some things were familiar. Her DNA coded with all the information she needed to know every sight, every sound, and every scent. She need not have ever seen a specific animal to know what it was. She was perfectly made to survive on her own with a gift from 1,000 generations before her, and to raise her pups, and then she would attract a new mate, and the cycle would repeat. Move, eat, reproduce, and survive. She crawled up the bank and moved forward in a carefree trot a coyote does when they look like they're on their way to no particular place. A mouse moved a blade of grass in the frozen brush ahead, and she saw it and she pounced and dug and she ate it whole after crushing its skeleton with her molars. She moved in search of another. She was veiled in the shadows of pines on this sunny, windy, cold day, and the wind brought the coppery scent of blood, a bigger meal, and she changed direction into the wind, ears high, nostrils flared, and the small muscles not seen rolling under her thick winter coat. An hour passed, and the cadence of her pace never changing until her nose told her she was there, and she stopped and scanned the area for other predators and humans and anything that would keep her from getting back to her litter. It was dark now, and she needed to feed and get back before the pups froze. They had to eat too, so she moved to a pile of deer scraps left by a hunter. The first thing she ate was the liver, and that was enough. But even so, she gnawed on the heart, squeezing the blood into her mouth, never taking her eyes away from all that surrounded her. The location was imprinted on her so that she would be able to remember this place forever, and she made for her den miles away and started her trek, and then she stopped and stood motionless when the scent of something she had never encountered swarmed her sinus cavity and burned into her brain. The inherited database had nothing like this for her reference. The odor was foreign, and it did not belong. It caused her to look up and not move until it moved. Whatever it was dangerous, and it was close. But it didn't move, so she moved. She had to get back to her litter. She had been gone too long, and that's when it moved. She darted away like the athlete that she was and avoided its grasp, and she felt its claws graze her sensitive hide. And with a leap and then a dead-out sprint, she moved away from the creature and left it frustrated and defeated behind her, chasing for a distance and then giving up. Another drop from a tree almost landing on her, blasting sticks and mud into the air, confusing her sense of direction. But she avoided the attack and moved in any direction that was away from the massive predator. Now she was heading away from her den and the pups would be making noise. There was no other way. For a while nothing was chasing her and the foreign scent was getting weaker. She had to survive if the pups were to eat, and she took an hour longer to get to them. Exhausted, the coyote approached the underground den to hungry, crying pups. She had been hearing them for several minutes, and she picked up her pace to an almost run. Silence would be her only defense through this cold, dark night. One had crawled out into the open looking for food. Rain and sleet bounced off her wet coat and had covered the pup in ice. So young that its eyes had not opened, but it was alive, and with a pup in her mouth she darted into the den and dropped the pup with the others and made several circles around the whining animals and finally laid down. She hushed them quickly by offering her underbelly and food. The warmth of her body and the nourishment would keep them sleeping through the night, and it would keep them quiet. She raised her nose high while the pups fed, anticipating the new and wretched scent to drift into the shallow den, and if it did, she would abandon her den and her offspring and leave the area. She could mate again. Something new and evil and hungry had entered her world. Warren Banks crept into the woods just after daylight. The creature he had seen from his back porch came out at dusk, and he never saw activity during the day. If he set his traps early, he might catch one. He made his way to the first tree, and he stopped and unraveled the cord and tied it to a low branch, an oak branch, strong enough not to break when the animal fought against it. The string was tied properly, and he reached into the plastic bag of deer meat, thawed since the night before, and wadded it on the hook, making sure the meat covered the sharp points, and then he moved to another tree. An hour and a half later, 12 traps were baited. Warren looked back at the large treble hooks with meat hanging from them, and he admired his cleverness. Other animals would be hanging from the hooks the next day, but he didn't care. He just needed to catch one of those monkeys and get to it before it died. He left the woods and walked across the dead bean field toward the house, stopping at the junk in his backyard to wipe the mud from his boots on the tracks of an old dozer before climbing the steps to the back porch. His grandson greeted him as he entered the kitchen and held out a toy truck from Santa. His daughter cooked the Christmas morning breakfast, and on any normal Christmas morning, he would have been in a better mood and taken in the heat and the heavy smell of biscuits and bacon and gravy. But the kid annoyed him, and Warren didn't know who the father was, and he wondered if his daughter even knew. He ignored the cheerful display of the gifts Santa had left that morning. He pushed the truck and the kid aside, and he walked past his daughter, and he held his hands in the air as if touching the child would infect him with some disease. He only spoke to his daughter when he needed to exchange information, and she did the same. They had been close once, but now she didn't like her father. They had drifted apart when she left with the boyfriend that he knew was trouble. She had been gone for a year and never called, and she showed up with a baby and a blanket saying she had no other place to go and she wouldn't stay long. She just needed to get her bearings and find a job, and when she had enough money saved, she would move into her own place. Warren gritted his teeth and said okay. They had lived in the house for almost 2 years now, and he never wasted the opportunity to humiliate her with his passive-aggressive ways or to ignore them both with indifference. He avoided one phrase, though. I told you this would happen. Those were the words that would drive her away, and he might never see her and the child again. And as much as he hated how her life had turned, he knew that driving her away might put her in danger. living on the streets, turning to the worst people for help. Hell, she could die. She would take the boy too, and the boy could die with her. So he would help her, but he wouldn't let go of the animosity, and the best he could do was let her share his roof and some food, but nothing would make him act like he liked it. She got the message loud and clear, and she hated him back. Warren skipped the meal and went to his truck, leaving them on this Christmas morning to enjoy it without him. It would be better this way, he thought. He couldn't stand the clanking and banging and whizzing of new toys, so instead of acting like he wanted to be there, he would ride around for a while, maybe all day. The first creature appeared a week ago. He had walked out onto his back porch to have a drink and be away from the chatter of the kid. The sun was setting and the shadows of winter almost obscuring his view across the field when he saw something walk out of the trees. He would not have seen it had it not been a shade that contrasted with the browns and grays of the southern winters. It was black against the backdrop of trees and mud and beanstalks, and it walked upright on two legs. He was up with a jerk from the worn-out couch that had been sitting on the porch for years and started for the field to evict this trespasser from his land. He stumbled around an old rusty piece of farm junk and he walked into the field. Halfway there, he could see that this was not a man. It was an animal. Not an animal he had ever seen in the woods, but clearly this was not a man. He turned back to the house and tripped over a rusty bush hog laying useless in his yard. He got up and staggered back into the house and he got his rifle. He rested the rifle on the blade of another junk bulldozer and he focused in on the black figure. It was an ape. It was picking things out of the mud and putting them in his mouth and eating them, and he thought probably crawdads hibernating in the soft mud. At the edge of the tree line, behind this creature, he saw more, larger, barely moving figures that looked the same, but these must have been the adults. He was watching a family of gorillas in his damn field, and the adults looked on as the youth rummaged for food. He clicked the safety off on his rifle, and he lined up on the biggest ape at the tree line, and he started to squeeze off around, and then he stopped. I could make some damn money out of these gorillas. First clan of gorillas in North America discovered on his land would make a great news story. Well, Warren wasn't sure how the money would flow his way, but he could figure that out later. So instead of killing one, he would catch one. And in his mind, gorillas were predators. They were meat eaters, and he knew how to catch predators. Warren reached under the driver's seat and found a paper bag with a pint of old Granddad. And after a pull from the bottle, he backed away from the house and he headed toward the swamp roads. Dark gray clouds blocked the sun and gave the day a depressed mood. The whiskey helped. He slowed to a crawl on the first gravel road that wound through the area behind his house. 3 miles later, he intersected the Blacktop County Road and abandoned his search for the creatures. What would he do if he saw one anyway? He parked at the edge of a field, a place he'd like to go to drink and watch whatever was going on in the field. Anything but go home and deal with her and that kid. Agriculture surrounded him in every direction. The only landmarks on the flat land were utility poles. He fell asleep. A bump to his truck woke him from a sleep. And after looking around and seeing nothing, he turned the bottle up and finished that pint off, and he reached under the seat for the next one. Across the field in the gray light, he could make out a tiny patch of trees that lined a ditch bank, a tiny, dark line on the horizon. It was 2 miles away, and the land between him and that small grove of trees once belonged to his family. Corporate ag had made him an offer, and he bit, selling everything he owned except 120 acres where his house sat. A tinge of guilt trickled through his mind, making his back burn with envy now that others owned it and he didn't. But at 71 years old, what would he have done with it? He couldn't leave it to his daughter plus some gutter rat that she thought loved her. The money was safe in the bank, and he made a mental note to do something, write something in his will so that the money wouldn't get into her hands. He was sure his lawyer could think of a way to keep the money out of the hands of the next loser that she let into her life. A figure rose in front of the truck, and it scared the hell out of Warren, and the bottle flipped from his hand and tumbled into the floorboard. The mystery of the noise that woke him was now solved. A freezing mist had begun to coat the windshield while he napped, and whoever this was blurry. Banks could make out reds and oranges and blues in a distorted image that was now walking to the driver's window. His keys fumbled to the floorboard and settled in the whiskey he spilled. He had put on some weight, and opening the door was the only way to reach them, so he sat there waiting to see who this mystery person was. Knuckles tapped on the window, and a short figure stood looking through the glass until he rolled the window down and saw that it was a woman. She was dressed in ragged clothes with an orange and red pullover cap knitted from some cheap crochet pattern. Gray hair hung out the edges and fell across her shoulders and blew across her face in the wind. As she raised a gnarled, arthritic hand to pull the hair to the side to reveal one eye that looked normal and the other that appeared to be a giant gray marble. But it wasn't a marble. It was her eye, diseased and glazed over with a white bulge, where her iris should be, and protruding twice the size of the other eye and a half-inch lower on her cheek. She pushed her head into the open window, and Warren reared back as if their movements were tied together. "Warren Banks," she said. Her teeth were crooked and misshaped and in varying shades of brown. "How do you know my name?" "Don't worry about that shit, boy," she said. "Yes, I know something about you," she said. Warren looked down at the steering wheel, not knowing what to say. "I said I know something," she said it louder, and Warren jumped. "Damn lady, okay. What do you know about me?" "I know things about your land, things that have been happening there for months. I bet you didn't know." She shotgunned a string of snot from her left nostril. Warren shivered at that and wiped his hands on his pants as if she had blown snot in the truck. He rolled his window up a couple of inches. "Roll that back down," she said. He obeyed. "Time and space are strange things, Warren. Space bends over on itself, making time irrelevant. That's what's been happening on your place, and you've seen what came through when space overlapped. Yeah, it all came together right there on your land, not far from your back door. What's coming through is evil, boy, and it has to be stopped. I have one piece of advice for you if you want your daughter and your grandson and you to live the rest of your days peaceful." She looked at him and thought his eyes looked like ping-pong balls with black dots painted on them. He was scared, and that meant he had hurt her, and she backed up and turned to walk away, and she laughed as she walked. Wait, who are you? How do you know my name? What evil are you talking about? You mean the gorillas I've been seeing?" She was slowly making her way to the blacktop. She turned and aimed that goggle eye right at Warren Banks. "Them's not gorillas, dumbass. Them's the evil, and someone's coming to kill the evil. And do not interfere. Heed my words, Warren Banks. Do not interfere in any way." The freezing mist had turned to sleet and freezing rain. Warren watched her fade into the haze of ice, and then she was gone. Sleet bounced onto the window, pecking at his face, and he started the engine and pulled onto the blacktop, looking for the old woman, who should have been just a few feet ahead, but after a mile, she was not there. She had vanished into the winter. Warren let the truck idle on the shoulder, and he stared down the road, hoping to see her shape. Where the hell did she go? There was no way she could have gone this far with that fat-ass little shuffle of hers. And he rode back, watching the ditches on both sides, thinking she had fallen in one. And he gave up the search when he was back even with his drinking spot. She was talking about the creatures. Don't interfere. Don't get involved. Someone's coming. Don't get in their way. None of that made any sense. An image of one of those things hanging from the mouth on a treble hook formed in his mind. "Don't get in the way," she said. He had set up traps to do the most harm and inflict the most pain and interfere in the worst way, and it was getting dark, and he had to get back before they came out. He had to cut those lines down. And racing for home, he watched the clouds dip low to the ground, first in wisps, and then in full fog, and the cold interacting with the warm fields, and he knew he would not get home in time. Warren raced down the road to his house and skidded into the gravel area in his front yard, and he jumped out of his truck and he ran across the yard in a panic. It was dark now, so he retrieved his flashlight from the back porch, and he pulled on his rubber boots and started to run across the field, but decided his lungs couldn't take it, and combined with the whiskey that he had drank, he was sure he would fall flat on his face in the mud, so he walked at a fast pace. Ice had begun to accumulate and crunch with each step, and the woods were darker than the field when he crossed the threshold of the trees. He fumbled with the light and switched it on and saw the first two traps swaying in the wind, and he cut them both down and he wrapped the hooks in a rag. "Now I can't remember where the hell I hung all these strings," he thought. So he walked deeper into the woods, shining the light back and forth. Another hook hung a few yards away. "I think this is where I bore to the right a little," he thought. In the years he had used this method to trap predators, he had never taken a trap down. It would stay where it was placed forever, or until the string rotted or the hook rusted away. And if he caught a few coyotes after setting the traps out, he would cut the carcass down and let them rot, kill the animals still alive and cut them down, and then he would lose interest in the traps and forget them and leave them. The image of the woman's face and that ridiculous hat and that goggle eye invaded his mind, and he was right there with her again. Why the hell am I so afraid of what that woman said? She's full of shit. Oh, fuck it, I'm here now. Might as well get those traps out just in case she's right. Warren stopped walking and took a breath and tried to relax and get his heart rate down so he could concentrate. He took a few steps toward the next trap and he stopped. Something was wrong. He heard a sucking and munching sound and a purr like a cat when it lays on your lap. And then the scream caught him off guard and he dropped the flashlight. And his eyes opened wider than eyes should be able to open, trying to take in more light to see what was making this awful noise. He bent over to pick up the light, but he kicked it another 2 times, and he finally had a grip on it, and he turned to get the hell out of there. What the hell is this? It isn't natural, and Warren wanted no part of it. But he stopped and he jerked around to shine the light toward the noise. He had to see it. 2 traps hung in the light, and beyond that was the young gorilla, hung with a treble hook. Its hand was attached to its mouth at the same time, and it pulled away when the string would tighten and embed the barbs deeper, and then it would squall even more. "I'll be damned, I got one. I'm going to crack that gorilla over the head and drag him out of these woods, and I'm going to lock him in the shed, and then I'm going to call the news station." And gripping the light tighter, he moved toward the creature. More screams came from the woods in the distance. "Oh shit, he's calling other gorillas. I'm running out of time." So Warren high-stepped it over some vines and was within feet of the young gorilla when one of the adults walked into his light. But it wasn't a gorilla. Warren had decided to run, but he hesitated and he shined the light around. Other creatures stood there heaving, either in anger or from stress. He didn't care, and it rushed to the young creature and it lifted it from the ground by its feet, and then it slung the offspring into the tree, and the young gorilla went silent. It was obviously dead. Now Warren knew all the attention would be focused on him, and fear ran through his body, producing bile that crept its way up in his throat and burned when it didn't move back down into his stomach. He backed up a few steps, running the light across the area where 2 more creatures watched, while the adult snatched up the youth and slammed it against the tree again. The other three joined in, and the roars and the screaming were more than Warren could stand, and he turned and ran. In the beam of his light, he briefly saw a young pig struggling against a hook set firmly in its mouth. Its squealing, combined with the roars of the monsters, was deafening. In the light, a coyote darted in and snatched the pig by its neck and bit down, and it shook. He kept the light on the spectacle as he ran. The pig went limp except for the last wiggles of a dying animal, and the coyote lifted it and ran. And the line went tight, and the pig hit the ground, but the coyote picked it up and pulled the pig hard enough so that the hook ripped free from the animal's mouth, and she vanished into the night. Warren made it to the field, and his boots sank into the mud, slowing him down and exhausting him, so he slowed to a walk, and the roars began to quiet behind him. The light of the porch got closer with each step, and then he fell face down in the icy mud, and he began to cuss. And before he could get up, he was grabbed by the leg and dragged back into the trees, screaming for someone to help him. The pups nursed until her body had no milk to offer. The female was hungry too, and it was time to hunt or they would starve. Every hour she had lifted her head to the den opening and caught the scent that had chased her days before, and tucked herself back inside to gather the pups near her. Danger was always close now. Two of the pups followed her out of the den when she first tried to leave, but she ushered them back into the deepest part until they were settled, and then she left. She traveled into the wind so that any danger in front of her would be detected. Nocturnal hunting is when she did the best, but it was risky because that is when their scent was strong. But still, she trotted on, looking for anything in this winter wasteland to eat. Light-footed but slow, she moved through the darkness and the ice that had formed on the ground, making little to no sound, and lifting her muzzle high to catch the scent of anything that she could move toward or run away from. In a normal world, she would not feel the need to conserve energy with food everywhere, but in her weakened state, she was conscious of the weakness in her legs. On she traveled, not in the carefree trot of a coyote, but in a lowered posture, alert and ready to move should any sign of the creatures appear. And she caught the scent of something that did not present danger. It was blood. Her instinct registered the scent of the squealing animals that roamed the woods, rooting the ground. They were hard to catch and kill because the adults protected them with their fierce tusks and hooves. However, the small ones offered an easy meal if she could catch a group off guard. Dart in, take a pig, and retreat before the adults knew she had been there. She shifted direction and picked up her pace and moved, following the scent into the wind. The coyote stopped, knowing by her nose only that she was just out of sight, and listened for the rooting and snorting that always let her know exactly her position in relation to the prey. But there were no sounds, and the odor was still telling her that she was close. She moved forward, slow, step by step, like a cat, never moving her head or her eyes, her shoulder blades rising and falling, alert to anything that would give its position away. But still there was no sign of her prey. She crept under a patch of vines that were still green, with everything else around her a dead gray, and she laid down, and her legs under her, ready to bolt if she needed to, and she watched and she listened. Her nocturnal vision caught a slight movement, and she locked her eyes on that position. And what she saw was a straight vertical line that did not belong in the woods. It moved slightly, and then swayed and went still, and then it moved again. As she focused harder, an instinct told her to back out and leave the area, but she was too hungry, so she inched forward, allowing her line of sight to see better the possible prey in front of her. It wasn't a baby, but it was a smaller version of the adults. A juvenile swine stood on its back 2 legs, its front legs just an inch off the ground, and it struggled. It was wounded and under stress, the perfect prey right there for her to take. So she slowly rose from her crouch and was in motion to quickly grab the animal and kill it and head straight back to her den when a screech she had not heard before ignited the forest. Shifting her head back and forth, she looked for the noise, but the scent hit her before she saw it. It was the danger that she had tried hard to avoid. The whole forest erupted around her with the new creatures running in from all directions. Not knowing which way to run, she got lower and became part of the forest floor and waited to find a gap to escape. They were the largest animal in the woods, larger than anything she had encountered. They were screaming and wailing and smelling up the area, and one ran 2 feet to her side and it never saw her. And she stayed still, more afraid than anything, knowing that if she moved, they would find her. But their attention was not on her. It was directed at the screaming ahead close to the animal prey that she had seen just a minute ago. The monsters ran past her prey and gathered around one of their own, fighting the same vertical line that she had seen the pig attached to. The creatures were so involved with their own, trying to pull it loose from the string, that she saw her opportunity to dart in and grab the pig and leave before they knew she was there. It was a fast run and a quick bite and a pivot back out of the area, but the pig jerked out of her mouth. Was it worth another try? Her hunger said yes, so she bit harder on the pig that was now screaming as loud as the small monster, and she jerked it free and ran at full speed away from the area. Stopping halfway back to her den, she tasted the blood that had flowed from the wounded pig, and bit hard on its neck before it went limp on the ground. But she was tired now and exhausted from the stress and energy expended. But she picked up the kill anyway and used her last stores of calories to get back to the den. With the pups there to greet her, peeking out at the opening, she pushed past them and they followed her deeper into safety and food. And placing her front paw on the pig, she began to tear at the tough hide until blood flowed and the meat was exposed. And the pups, who had only nursed at her belly until now, began to lap at the blood and tear small pieces of meat from the carcass. They fed until their bellies were full, and they all drifted to sleep, and the female laid in the den listening to the howls of anguish from the creatures who had tried to kill her days before, and the sleet fell clicking just outside the den. The predators had survived another day. Steve Lilly sat on the beach alone. Stars shined to his left in a blue and black sky, and to the west the orange glow of the sun had almost turned to blue, total darkness almost complete. The waves rolled in with soft slaps, and the Gulf Christmas Day breeze brought the scent of the salt water. No one was there but him, and he had found peace for now. Angela had fixed a Christmas meal for them, and Lilly had eaten every bite on his plate only an hour before. He shifted his weight to relieve the pressure his belt put on his full Christmas belly, and he stood and watched the stars in the black sky, and he turned away from the water and walked through the dunes and across the highway to the condominium he had rented 3 days before. In a moment of spontaneity for both of them, they loaded her car and headed south for the Christmas and New Year holiday on the Gulf of Mexico. Steve was familiar with the area, and he had taken Angela to some of the out-of-the-way and lesser-known places to eat. The idea was to spend a week holed up in the condo and walking the beach or watching bowl games on TV and eating. There was no place to be on time, no one to see. Work had been left behind. And they slept late, and they stayed up late, and like kids again, they were free. His handlers had not called for a squatch hunt in weeks, which was odd. Squatches were generally more active in the colder months, and it had been quiet in the monster-killing business since October. Steve retrieved his cell phone from his pocket. It had been left and turned off on the bar at the condo since they arrived. He left the business phone with Hook before he and Angela left and told Hook not to call him unless it was something Hook and Lewis and Isabel couldn't handle on their own. He powered his personal phone on and walked across the holiday abandoned highway to their rental, and his phone buzzed right away, showing several voicemails from Hook and Lewis. It was 10 p.m. "Steve, I know you're on vacation, but you need to call me." Hook had left a message. The next message in the rotation began, "Look, call me ASAP." It was Hook's voice again. Another message, "Pick up the damn phone, asshole." It was the unmistakable voice of Lewis Shanks. More voicemails waited from the same numbers, but he skipped those and he called Hook. Steve sat down on the top step leading to the deck of the condo as Hook answered. "Where the hell have you been, man?" Hook asked. "Well, you just left the message an hour ago. Damn, I just turned my phone on." "Okay, well, Red called an hour ago. We need to get down south of Vicksburg and deal with a problem." "A hairy ape problem? Is it a big job?" Steve asked. "Well, of course. She didn't call to say hi and see how my houseplants are doing." Okay. I'll need coordinates for an address. We're in Angela's car, so I don't have my gear. Can you pick it up at my house?" "I'm not calling to ask you to come along," said Hook. A swarm of envy ran up Steve's back. He felt like the kid who hadn't been picked for a game of kickball in school. "I'm coming. Send me the damn address," he said, more serious than Hook had heard Steve talk in a while. "It's not that we don't want you to be there. You're on vacation, brother. You got your lady with you, and I'm sure you two are having a good week. So just stay there. I just needed to pass along a message." Hook shut up, and he waited to see how Steve reacted. There was a bit of relief in Steve's voice when he answered. Hook seemed satisfied that he hadn't hurt his friend's feelings. "Oh, I'm coming. I wouldn't miss this for nothing. We are having a good time, but I'm already sick of this place. Doesn't feel right being here in the winter. I should be in my sandals with a cooler full of beer on the beach. So I'm coming. Angela will understand. Now, what's the message anyway?" "I don't know. When Red called, she told us where to go and to read the intel on our way down. Then she said to tell you to call Blue as soon as you were alone." Now, she said that twice, Steve, the alone part. "All right," Steve said. "I'll call him. Send me the location. Where is it? I mean, what part of the country?" It's a little south of Vicksburg. I'll send the coordinates. I think I have an address, too. I'll text all that to you." Hook hated talking on the phone, and he hoped Steve would just say okay so he could hang up. "Well, send it now," Steve said. Hook didn't answer, but Steve could hear him fiddling with the phone, trying to send the information. Steve got a notification in his ear, and he opened the message, and he said, "You know where this is, don't you?" "Yeah," said Hook. "That's another reason that you should just stay there and finish your vacation." "Well, at least we know the wood's there," said Steve. "I might get there before you. Stop and get my gear and come on." The place they were going to held powerful memories for he and Steve. He wasn't sure how Steve would do, especially if they had to go deep into the wetlands and into the areas where the memories took place. But there was nothing Hook could say to change Steve's mind. He also knew if the roles were reversed, Steve wouldn't be able to keep him out of this hunt, no matter how bad the memories were. Davis Island was a landmass left by the ancient, ever-changing path of the Mississippi River and surrounded on one side by the river channel and an oxbow on the other. It was encircled by wildlife management areas, a place where squatches took advantage of the light hunting pressure from the locals. It was south of Vicksburg and on the Arkansas side of the river, but they could get there easily by boat if they needed to. The hunt would not start there, and Hook hoped that they would never have to go to Davis Island. The location of the incident they were to investigate was on the Mississippi side on a farm in the Delta, but it was too close to the place where he and Steve had fought for their lives so many years ago. If they got lucky, this was a hunt for one or two creatures and they would be in and out. But this team was always ready for whatever happened. That's what he thought. He headed to Steve's place to load his gear and connect Steve's boat to the expedition. Steve walked back into the door of the unit. Angela wasn't there. He called for her, and he got no answer. She wasn't in the bedroom. He thought maybe she had fallen asleep, but the bed was empty. The light shone under the door of the master bathroom, and he walked to the door and was about to tell her that he was back when he heard her voice. She was talking to someone over a phone. He only caught a few words. "I don't know anything about. He'll be, that's all, tell you. He's calling for me. I have to. Can we see each other soon?" Steve backed away from the door, not wanting to eavesdrop on her phone call, while at the same time not feeling the guilt of overhearing what she had said before she hung up. He sat down at the kitchen table. "Hey," she said, walking into the kitchen. "I thought you were sitting on the deck. I was about to join you. You want something to eat?" Steve hesitating, the words he had heard still on his mind, and he didn't answer, but he stared at her. "Are you okay?" she asked. Still, he stared at her. "Steve, snap out of it. It's me, Angela." "I know who you are. Nah, I'm still full from that meal today. Listen, I've got some bad news. We've been called into work, so to speak. We got to leave tonight. I'm sorry to cut this trip short, but I don't have a choice." "You mean leave now?" she asked. "Yeah, I know it's a pain in the ass, but yeah, we need to pack now and hit the road. Maybe we can finish this job in a day or two and we can drive back down here and still get in a couple of days of vacation. Now let's get moving. You can sleep in the car. I'll drive." "Well, okay. Well, if that's the way it has to be. I assume this is a hunt and it can't wait." "Yeah, that's it. We could have it wrapped up by tomorrow if we get lucky. On vacation and still making money. It doesn't get any better than that," said Steve. Angela rolled her eyes and walked into the bedroom and began to gather her things. Steve walked out to the deck and looked into the night sky. Steve Lilly had abandoned suspicion of others years ago. His life had moved past that phase, but the roots were still there. There was a time when there was no one he could trust, and this would take effort to suppress and remember that he probably had a good woman here, and he elected to put it out of his mind, admitting to himself that he was just being paranoid. He had to get into the right frame of mind anyway. It was time to kill squatches. He took a long pull on his cigarette and he thumped the butt, arcing into the dark and landing with a flash of orange sparks hitting the parking lot. The phone call he overheard was still on his mind. Hook picked up Lewis and Isabel at the trailer park, and after loading weapons and gear into the expedition, they headed south on Highway 61 into the Delta. "You have 5 hours to sober up," Hook said to both of the passengers. "I ain't drunk," Lewis said. "I am full. May need to shit somewhere down this highway." Isabel was sound asleep behind them, reclined in the big seat. Now, he was drunk, but he would be alert when they got there. Hook had spent the day with his father watching TV and eating junk food, and they had downed a few drinks, but Hook wasn't drunk. Might be a good idea to take a shit too before we get there, he thought. 3rd Street turned into Highway 61, and they came off the bluff into the flatlands. An occasional light illuminated the levee to their right, and casino billboards came one right after the other, and Hook pressed the accelerator when the blacktop leveled out, pushing Lewis back into the cushioned seat. Sleet ticked rhythmically on the windshield. Steve and Angela got out of the truck in the front yard of the Banks place. The sun had begun lighting the eastern sky. He had enough light that he didn't need a light to see, but he waited in front of the truck for a few minutes to be sure, and he listened. The winter storm was in full force now, and freezing rain and mostly sleet clicked on every object around him. "Why don't you get back in the cab while I look around?" he said. Angela didn't question him and crawled back into the warmth of the truck. The house had been built in the middle of a grove of trees, like most farm owner houses in the Delta. Steve could see massive sheds just down the road with storage silos rising behind. He expected to see a fleet of farm equipment under the sheds, but instead, junk littered the area. Walking around the side, more junk equipment sat rusting in the back with the tall brown weeds up to his knees, creeping in on the old rusty heaps, and it looked like a junkyard. But the equipment wasn't on his mind. It was the hiding places the junk offered that kept him alert, and he walked slowly around the house with his eyes on the junk for anything that moved. "There's one right there. Be careful," a female voice said from the back porch. "How close is it?" Steve replied, completely unfazed by the voice. "Last time I shot at it, it was behind that plow. I've hit it twice. It just keeps coming back." "How many are there?" Steve said, now with his pistol at the ready and backing away from the dead weeds. "Well, there's no way to know. Maybe a dozen, maybe more, maybe a lot more." The creature's head appeared behind a sweet gum sapling that had grown up through the open grate of a rig. Steve didn't wait to make out the details. His pistol eased over and lined up on the silhouette of the head. "There aren't any people out here, right? If I shoot this thing, it's not going to be your uncle or your cousin, is it?" "My people are in the house," she said. "Kill it if you can. They kept coming about 1 an hour." She was standing now on the back porch, her shotgun pointed in the general direction. Steve lined up and shot once, and the creature dropped, and he moved to the creature laid out in the brush and put another round in its head. Certain now that it was dead, he moved his attention to the woods across the field. He expected more to come, like the lady had said, but after waiting, nothing came, so he backed up to the porch. When he was in a position to see the area better from the elevated porch, he counted 7 squatch corpses behind the house. "There's 2 more on the other side of the house," she said. She stared off into the field, and Steve watched the sleet bounce at the edge of the porch onto her feet, muddy toes exposed with muddy house slippers. She only wore a house coat, and he guessed that there was only a nightgown on under that, and her lips were blue and she shivered. "We need to get you inside and warm you up," he said, and slowly he put his hand on top of the shotgun to see if she would lower it. She looked at him for the first time, and the muscles in her arms let go and the gun fell, and Steve caught it before it hit the porch floor. He nestled his arm inside hers and walked her to the back door, and she turned to face him. "We called y'all last night. I've been waiting all this time for you to get here." "I know you have," he said. Lilly didn't think she would understand that the cops had never planned to show up. They considered the call a prank, and they had dismissed it. The agency had picked up on it, however, and knew it was real, and also knew that these people were in a bad spot. "I'll have to tell Blue that he made a good call on this one," thought Steve. "I'm not the law, but I was sent here to help," Steve said. She wouldn't grasp an explanation deeper than that in her state of mind. The woman had a dead look in her eyes, staring out into the foggy field. She said that they were attacking the house every hour, sending 1 or 2 at a time, and the wear on her nerves and physical state had taken a toll. Now Steve needed to get ready for what was coming. From the porch, he looked across the field and he saw nothing. He had time to check on Angela. And he was at the corner of the house, and he could see the rear panel of Angela's car, and he stopped, and he moved only his head until she was visible in the driver's seat. She was on her phone again and waving her hands in animated gestures, and he watched her, and she tapped her hand on the steering wheel as if whoever she was talking to could see her making a point with her hands. He backed up, and he took a deep breath, and then he walked fast around the corner to see her reaction. And she jumped. She said a fast goodbye and dropped the phone down to her side, and then she gave Steve a fake smile and rolled down the window. He didn't go to her side of the car. Instead, he walked to the hatch in the back and tapped on the glass. She released the hatch, and Steve leaned in to retrieve his rifle. "It's dangerous to be out here. You should follow me and get inside." He was so matter-of-fact that it unsettled her, and Steve had always been pleasant, but now he was all business. Paranoia was setting in for her. Did he know? She followed him to the back of the house, and he walked onto the porch and propped his rifle against the rail. "There's a woman in there who needs your help. Can you do that for me? I'll explain later. I need to stay out here." Okay, who is this woman?" "I don't know, but she might need your help getting cleaned up. Can you please just go inside and do that?" She didn't answer, and she turned toward the open door and walked in and closed it behind her. And when Steve looked back at the door, Angela was looking at him through the glass, and then she vanished into the house. He unzipped the fabric case and he slid his hunting rifle out, letting the case fall to the porch floor. And after removing the covers from the scope, he leaned the rifle again onto the rail and removed the loaded magazines from the pockets on the case, and he lined them up in an organized line on the top of the rail. The bolt was pulled back and he dropped a bullet behind the chamber, and he slid the bolt home. Safety was on, and he inserted a mag into the bottom of his Remington 700 and then raised the rifle to his shoulder and scoped the field. Nothing moved. Nothing was coming. He stepped off the porch and walked to the creature he had killed earlier. This was no average squatch. It was not an alpha, but it looked older than the squatches that he had seen in the size range. Its muscles were defined, and the hair was not matted and nasty like the others he had taken down, and it appeared clean as far as an animal can be clean, and it had only a slight odor. It was the face of the creature that made him look twice. Its head was big like the others, but it had a muzzle, like a dog, but not as pronounced as a dog. It jutted forward of its nose and mouth and was full of razor bone-white teeth. The brow was not pronounced like a Neanderthal-type skull so prevalent in all the varieties he had killed. This thing looked out of a comic book. Beyond the junk heap, he found more laying in the field with various wounds, and they all looked the same with little but noticeable differences. They were all females and juvenile males, and none had survived the shotgun blast that had put them down. "How did you know to use buckshot?" he asked the woman inside, who would never hear the question. He counted 6 dead around the house. "Must have been a hell of a night for you," he whispered. Back on the porch, he scoped the field and tree line again, and still nothing moved, and he walked in the back door, bolting the lock behind him. The house was neat and organized, with a touch of a woman, and the meal was on the table and untouched and cold. And he moved in the living area where an older man sat on the sofa with a young boy sitting next to him. The man had a bloody towel wrapped around his leg. "Are you hurt bad?" asked Steve. "One tried to drag me in the woods." Warren paused at having to admit that his daughter had saved him. "I'd be dead now if it wasn't for her." He pointed toward the back of the house, and Steve looked that way. He heard a shower running, and shadows moved in the hall. Angela had gotten the woman out of her dirty clothes and into a hot shower. "Well, what happened?" asked Steve. "Well, I saw one of those things a week ago. I was trying to catch one. Thought I could sell it at a zoo or a circus. But I ran into this woman, and she told me to take my traps down in so many words. I don't know where she came from or how she knew all this, but I believed her, and I drove back here to take down the traps. When I got out there was a bunch of those things, so I tried to get back to the house, but they caught me, dragged me a quarter mile through the field back into the woods. Maybe my daughter saw what was going on. I don't know, we hadn't had a chance to talk, but I heard a shot, and the one holding on to my leg dropped dead. She came in blazing and killed a few, and we got back to the house, and she's been out there all night fighting them off. It's the damnedest thing I ever seen." Well, Steve nodded and looked at the little boy in diapers who stood stiff-legged on the sofa cushion leaning on his grandfather's shoulder. Steve needed to get them out of there, but for now he had to wait until they were ready to travel. Once the woman had been cleaned up and dressed, he would send them away, and the old man needed to get to a doctor. "Hell, she called 911 last night when she got me inside. I called them again 3 times between then and now, and those sumbitches still hadn't showed up. Now, I know you're not a cop. Who are you?" Well, I'm from the Fish and Game Agency that deals with these creatures. It was Steve's normal response when victims of squatches asked who he was. Well, I didn't think she'd last much longer out there, said the old man. He changed positions on the sofa and winced with pain. The little boy patted his uninjured leg and looked up at his grandfather. She's been out there all night keeping those things from getting in the house. Now, I don't know how she did it, but she did it. And I'm not sure what's going on, but I'm glad you're here. Hell, I'm glad anybody's here. Well, why didn't y'all just leave? Asked Steve. Well, every time we'd get ready to go to the car, another one would show up. They were coming so often that we just couldn't get away. And then the old man, for the first time since the boy had lived in the house, reached over and rubbed his head. And my buddy here's been keeping me company. The little boy smiled and kept patting his grandpa's leg. Is the woman your wife? Asked Steve. No, she's my daughter and this is my grandson. He ran his hand over the boy's head again with affection. All right, as soon as she's ready, we're going to get y'all out of here and get you to a hospital. Is there anything you need for that leg? Steve pointed at it. Warren removed the towel. He had cut the pants leg off, but still had his boot on. 4 deep wounds seeped blood. Steve could see that clotting was now slowly cutting off the blood loss. Think you can get me another towel? Asked Warren. Steve walked into the hall, peeking around the corner to make sure Warren's daughter was decently dressed. He heard her and Angela in the bedroom, so he grabbed a white towel from the closet and handed it to Warren. My name's Steve Lilly. Warren Banks. This is my grandson, Nathan. Julia is in the other room. She's my daughter. Angela and Julia walked into the room. Julia had changed into jeans and a sweatshirt. Her hair was wet and she looked tired, but she was healthy and in one piece. Steve looked at Angela. I need you to drive them to the hospital. And the sooner y'all leave, the better. If these things are going to keep coming, you're all in danger. Steve helped Warren down the front steps into Angela's car. Julia and Nathan got in the back row of seats, and Angela got behind the wheel and started the car. Be careful, she said. Should I come back after they're settled? Nope. Wait until you hear from me. I'm sure there's a motel somewhere around here. Get a room and wait there. And I'm sure Nathan would have fun sleeping in a motel room. The little boy was tucked under his mother's arm, and he smiled at Steve. Now y'all get going, he said. I need to get on that porch. Hook and Lewis will be here soon, and then we'll come up with a plan. You won't go in there after them alone, will you? Angela asked. Not after these things. I'm not even sure what they are, said Steve. Angela backed out of the yard and got the car moving toward civilization. And in the rear-view mirror, she saw a creature moving fast around the house. Steve wouldn't have time to raise his rifle, so instead he snatched his 1911 up and put 3 rounds into the upper body of the beast. Angela watched it happen in the shaking rear-view mirror. The creature tumbled dead at Steve's feet. He looked over at the car, which was picking up speed, and he held his barrel up and blew the smoke off the end of the gun, and he waved at Angela. She rolled down the window and wagged her arm back and forth and rolled the window up. Sleet was falling hard. The sleet had not let up and had frozen onto the windshield, but with the engine still warm from their drive from the Gulf, it began to defrost quickly. Warren sat in the front seat staring straight ahead, saying nothing. Another stroke from the wipers in his side of the glass made what he could see clearer. Ahead through the mist of the falling ice, he saw an orange object bobbing up and down. A few feet closer, and he knew it was the goggle-eyed woman who had given him a warning the day before. There was no mistaking that pear-shaped figure in the road ahead. Angela started to slow. She wasn't going to leave someone out in this mess, but Warren told her to keep going, and he ducked his head lower, trying to hide. Goggle-Eye walked to the right side of the road, and when Angela reached her, she stopped and rolled her window down. Do you need a ride? Instead of answering, the woman moved closer to the car and leaned her head in through the open glass, making Angela recoil. She reached across Angela and picked up a magazine Angela had set on the console from their drive from the Gulf Coast, and she began slapping Warren with it. She was trying to reach his head, but she was too short. "What did I tell you, Warren Banks? What did I tell you? Now you've unleashed a terrible evil. Others are going to have to deal with it on a whole new level. Shame on you," she said. "Shame on you, boy." She stepped away and shook the sleep from her hat and heavy coat, and she kept walking. Everyone in the truck was silent. Nathan stirred in the back seat and stood up and watched the woman through the back window. Who is Mama? Who is Mama?" the kid said. "I don't know, honey. She knows Grandpa, apparently." Warren kept his head low. "Get me to the hospital, please. I'll tell y'all about it later." "She's heading toward those monsters," said Julia. "Don't worry about her. I think she's a ghost." Warren wagged his finger forward, telling Angela to get moving. She rolled her window up and accelerated forward. The round old woman in Technicolor clothes faded into the distance. Steve ran to the back porch. No creatures were attacking. He sat up in the rocking chair as before and got ready for the next attack, and while he waited, he called Hook. "Where are you, Hook?" "We're about an hour away. You there yet?" said Hook. "Been here for an hour. Hurry up, I ain't never seen one like this one." "Talk to us," Lewis said loudly so Steve could hear him. Hook put the phone on speaker and set it on the dash. Steve went over the high points, getting them up to date, and then he described the creatures. "These things are different, and there's a lot of them. Fuck, I feel like I'm in a zombie apocalypse." "It's apocalypse," said Lewis. "Thanks, Lewis," said Steve. "I can't say that word either, Steve. No worries, F.A., said Isabel. Isabel decided to wake up from his 5-hour nap, said Hook. "I ain't your F.A., Isabel, but I'm glad you could come. We are going to need you," said Steve. "Like I was trying to say, these things are different. They're smaller than your average squatch. The lady who called this in has already killed 6 with a shotgun alone, all by herself. I took another one out 30 minutes ago. They go down easy, a lot easier than those big sumbitches we've been hunting, and there seems to be a lot of them." "Are you in the woods with them now?" asked Hook. "Not this time. Too many to deal with. I'm going to wait on y'all. Be careful on these roads. Everything has a half-inch of ice on it. The roads got to be bad," Steve said with genuine concern for his friends and himself if they had an accident and were delayed. He didn't know what was coming next, and if the creature started coming more than one at a time, he might have a problem. "Hook, did you get all my gear?" "Yep, most everything. I couldn't get the bazooka in the car." "We have bazookas?" said Isabel. "I got something for you, hombre. Don't worry about it," said Hook, smiling at Isabel in the rearview mirror. "All right," said Steve. "See you guys when you get here." Lewis checked the GPS and verified that they were a little less than an hour from the pin the agency had dropped for them to navigate to. "This sounds like it's going to get complicated." Hook settled in the seat again and tucked his phone into his coat pocket and then concentrated on the road. To him, Steve seemed different, nervous, like he wasn't sure how to go with this hunt. It wasn't typical, but he wrote it off as Steve never dealing with this type of creature. 8 creatures had already been killed, maybe more. This was a huge payday already, and the team had not even started the hunt. Hook's phone rang in his pocket, and he answered. "Hook, did you tell Steve to call me?" asked Blue. "I did." "Then why hasn't he called me?" Blue was agitated. "I don't know. We just talked to him. He has his hands full at the moment. He's alone right now. Why don't you call him?" "Roger that," said Blue, and he disconnected the call. Lewis looked over at Hook. "What's that all about?" "Everybody's asking me questions that I don't know. How am I supposed to know what it's all about?" "You should have asked Blue what's going on," said Lewis. "You have to be curious." Now Lewis was agitated. "Well, I'm not curious, Lewis. You want to know why? Because I don't give a shit. I'm not his mama, and that means I figure the man can handle his own affairs. Why would I give a damn if he calls Blue or not? I told him to call him. Well, it might be important. That's all I'm saying. Damn, man, why you so aggravated? Lewis leaned over at Hook. Look, man, I'm sorry, said Hook. Something about this gig has me nervous. Didn't mean to take it out on you, but I'm not getting into the shit Blue needs to tell Steve. He'll let us know if it has anything to do with us. All right, good enough, said Lewis. And then he punched Hook in the shoulder. Asshole, said Lewis. Steve scoped the trees again. Nothing moved. Angela had driven off an hour ago. He hadn't heard from her, but he was sure they were fine. Maybe it was taking time to get Warren into the ER. So Steve settled back in the rocker and pushed with his legs to get the rhythm going. The boards creaked under the chair. He checked the trees to the left, 200 yards away, and still there was no movement. The animals that lay in the yard behind the house were darker than the average squatch, and he was sure that he would see them coming at the house without the scope. They wouldn't blend in with the light colors and gray of the Delta winter. He brought his eyes back to directly behind the porch, and a woman stood out in the yard, and it surprised him. She was facing away from him. She was wearing weird colors, and she was bundled up. He had a hard time hearing what she was saying, but she was talking. Ma'am, do you want to come up here on this porch and get out of the weather? She turned to face him. Always concerned with other people's comfort, Steve Lilly. You never put anyone behind you. You haven't changed a bit. Well, he knew the voice, and when she looked up at him, he recognized the eye and the scar on her face. He knew this woman. Agatha? He said in a soft tone. Agatha Benton? Lord knows it's good to see you, boy. She stepped up even with him as he stood from the chair. Steve didn't say a word. He reached out and embraced his old friend, and he held her tight for too long, so long that she pushed him away. Damn, boy, you were always affectionate. Ain't you cold out here? I'm freezing. Been walking around these parts in this hellish weather. I need something hot in this old body to warm me up. Come on in and I'll make some coffee. Lilly was hypnotized and speechless, but he had enough sense to know that if he went inside, the creatures would come without him seeing them. Oh, honey, they're done for the day. They won't come back till it gets dark. Take this time with me to rest and gather your strength. Lord knows you and those boys that are coming to help you is going to need it. And she walked inside, and Steve followed. Agatha went straight to the coffee maker and opened the cabinet until she found the coffee and filters. Steve sat at the table. I thought you were dead? She cut him off. Yeah. I should be, with me wandering around these parts and dealing with these visions, but you know how it is, don't you? When you see what's coming, you have to warn the innocent. You do know that, right? Well, my visions are not dependable. They never have been. Now, I know you remember me telling you these things. I told Sarah, too, and she talks just like you do. I don't trust them, and I've been wrong before, and I end up looking like a fool. So I've kept my mouth shut all these years. Steve looked down at the table and scratched off some dried food from the bank's Christmas breakfast. You haven't given yourself over to it, she said. That's the same thing Sarah said. He looked up at the old woman. The coffee trickled into the pot, and the room began to fill with the aroma, and it calmed him a bit. Give myself over to this and that, trust in something I don't know anything about. It's okay for you and her and all the other psychos out there, but it doesn't work for me. Agatha poured 2 cups and sat down, pushing a mug his way. I can't help you with that, she said. You have to figure it out and understand it and compartmentalize your thoughts and visions. You'll learn to sift through what your mind is injecting from your life and what the real future might be. Now, it's a gift to those who have an empathetic heart. That's what I think. If I had met another like us with a dark heart, I couldn't say this. So be open to it and try to calm your mind when the visions or the sight comes to you. Steve Lilly had been sent into exile or hiding when he was a young man. Many wanted his life for a righteous act that he committed when he was only 16. And during his exile, he fought battles against men who wanted him dead, and he had been wounded trying just to survive, once to the point that he should not have recovered. But Agatha was there during that time, and she brought him back. He looked at her face, and the gray hair hung in clumps and matted tangles, and she reached into her pocket and then pulled her hair back into a ponytail and wrapped the hair tie around it. Her face was exactly the same, but a little older. It should have been much older, because the last time that Steve had seen Agatha was over 40 years ago. He didn't know how old she was back then, but she had to be at least 60, and she shows back up 40 years later and looks almost the same. Hell, she ought to be dead, he thought. But even now, her voice and demeanor gave Steve some peace, just as she had done for months while he lay in a bed close to death. The upcoming fight with the strange creatures left his mind, and he listened to her without interruption, and he lost track of time. A vehicle driving into the yard brought him back to the present, and he stood up and was about to greet them at the door when Agatha placed her hand on his arm. "Sit down for a minute, honey." And Steve dropped back in the chair. "Your men are going to wait for you while I tell you this. Now, these creatures you're about to kill are not the same as the others you've hunted." She paused, and Steve wondered how the hell she knew all this and what he had been doing for the last few years. She continued, "They're faster and they're more vicious, but they're easier to kill, so you'll have to be fast. Now, I'm going to tell you some things that won't make sense, but it'll make sense in time. Now, the creatures you hunt now are not from this world, but they have been a part of this world for 1,000 years. They've adapted and changed and evolved and gotten smarter, and there aren't many of them. The last time they came to this world was within a brief moment in time. A door opened, and then it closed, and only a few got through. But this time the door has been open longer than ever, and they're finding their way here in good numbers. They haven't adapted to this world, and they don't know anything about the woods and the guns that people use, and that makes them easier to kill. But you'll have to shut that door if it doesn't close on its own. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "Agatha, I don't understand a damn word you just said." "Well, you will." Agatha patted his arm. "Now go let your friends inside. That's a big pot of coffee over there." Steve smiled and squeezed her small hand and went to the door where he waved the Squatch hunters inside. He returned to the kitchen wanting to hug his friend, but she was gone. Out on the back porch, he yelled at Agatha, "Where are you going? You'll freeze out there." And she waved and kept walking, and he knew not to follow her, and he didn't know if he would ever see her again. "Who was that walking around the house?" asked Lewis. "That was Agatha Benton," Steve said. "Get the fuck out," Hook said. "Are you sure that was her? Damn, how old is she now, 100? "I don't know how old she is, but that was her, or her ghost. She looks about the same except for the clothes and that hat. She's still got that stoned eye she got when—" And Steve trailed off and shut up. "Yeah, I remember," said Hook. "She took care of you and herself at the same time. Always liked her, but she still freaks me out a little." "What the hell are y'all talking about?" said Lewis. "Story for another time," Steve said, turning to walk into the kitchen. "Okay, you fellas gonna have to let me in on some of these secrets at some point. You're making me paranoid. Look, dude, let's get this job done, and I'll tell you everything you want to know about Agatha," said Hook. "What's the plan, F.A.?" asked Isabel. Steve sat down at the table. "I haven't had time to think about it. I've been dealing with other stuff. But let me tell you what I know, and let's get some ideas. I don't even know where to start." The other men joined Steve at the table, except Hook, who walked to a window where he could see into the bean field. The sleet had let up just a little, and it turned to drizzling rain. The temperature was rising, and a misty haze settled low to the ground, and he couldn't see where the woods started. "Steve, how far are the woods?" asked Hook. "Maybe 300 yards. Hook left the kitchen and walked out to his car, and he opened the rear door and took out a rifle bag and then walked around to the backyard. He had a new rifle he had been practicing with at the range. It's a .50 caliber bolt rifle, a Macmillan TAC-50C with a thermal vision scope on top. He had spent weeks getting to know the rifle, and he found that he loved just shooting at the targets. Lewis found the rifle and gave it to Hook. Hook, having watched a video of a man using one to kill a deer, had to have one. The round never hit the deer but flew 10 inches to the left of the animal's head, but the concussion or the shock wave from the large bullet dropped the deer anyway. Hook began studying the 50 cal round, and he learned that the concussion from the bullet would not do damage to flesh and bone, but he had seen this in a video and he remained interested. On the range, and after getting a feel for the rifle, he began to become proficient with it. He thought it would come in handy for long shots, even long shots in the dark, which is why he bought the thermal vision scope. He could see the squatches a long way off, but they couldn't see him, and he liked that advantage. With the rifle over his shoulder, Hook walked to an old bulldozer that looked like it had been abandoned 50 years earlier. The front blade was the height he needed for a rifle rest. This rifle was heavy, and it was not a weapon to use offhand. He would always need a rest. He took off his coat and pulled the rifle in close and settled on a spot where he would be comfortable looking through the scope, and he flipped on the thermal imaging feature. He allowed his eye to adjust to the images in the scope. He could make out tree trunks and limbs with great clarity. Lowering the rifle slightly to get the ground in view, he scanned to the right a few feet, and he got a hit. A squatch stood just beyond where the tree started, rocking back and forth, shifting its weight from one leg to the other like it was anxious or impatient. Further to the right, he saw another bigger than the first, and by the time he had scanned a 100-yard section of tree line, he counted 14 creatures, all in the same posture but in varying sizes. The others had walked onto the porch. "They're out there. I count 14, Hook said, without taking his eye from the scope. "Isabel, go get our night vision gear and let's scan the trees and see what we can see," said Steve. Lewis went with Isabel and gathered up the rifles for each man. After they had looked through the fog and the mist, they discovered there were more than 14 creatures. "Those fuckers are everywhere," said Steve. "Okay, what's the plan?" said Lewis. "Hook, why don't you take the biggest one you can see out with that big cannon?" said Steve. Hook looked back and grinned. "My pleasure." "Don't hit him in the head," said Lewis. "I guess I don't need to tell you that." The big rifle boomed and made the other three jump, and when Hook got his eye back in the scope, chunks of Bigfoot were still falling. A warm white material had sprayed the trees and other squatches standing close. "I think I exploded it," Hook said. "Can y'all see that big-ass leg laying in the field?" "Get you another one, killer," said Steve, and Hook loaded another bullet and fired. When 5 creatures had been misted, Hook released the magazine and reached for another one. Steve asked him to hold up, and they looked to see what was happening. Steve expected the creatures to run away, but they didn't. The monsters were running across the muddy field straight at them. "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" Hook asked anyone who could hear him. He never got an answer except for a rifle going off to his left. The men moved up and took up positions around the junk lining the perimeter of the yard, and their rifles were equipped with tactical infrared scopes, but at the distance they were looking, they could not judge the distance and wouldn't until the creatures got within about 200 yards, but they fired anyway, trying to get their range. Hook exploded another one just a few feet into its charge. A lot of ammo was being expended, but few monsters were hitting the ground. Lewis moved up to and beside a piece of farm equipment, and he got his legs tangled in some rigging that he hadn't seen due to the gaggle of brush and weeds that had never been cut. He fell face first in the weeds and started fighting to get up. Steve and Isabel finally got their range figured and were dropping squatches. The bonsai attack had made it within 100 yards, and they weren't killing them fast enough. Lewis still fought to get his legs untangled from the loose cables strewn about the ground, and Hook's last shot went high, and he knew the creatures were too close for his scope to be accurate, so he dropped the 50 cal and ran back to the porch, picking up his A-10, and lifted it to his shoulder and then yelled at the others, "Steve, everything in the left quarter. Isabel, take the quarter to the right of Steve. Lewis, you take the right quarter and I'll kill anything that gets too close to any of you guys." They knew what Hook meant. He could see what was happening better from the elevated porch. Every squatch in this charge was visible now, but they were still blurry in the mist, yet still enough to aim at. And 2 rifles started cutting down the fast creatures that were now only 50 yards away. Hook looked over at Lewis. He was still on the ground, kicking at the cables wrapped around his legs, and his rifle was flailing in the air while he fought the trap. "Lewis, you checking the oil on that piece of equipment? We need you, brother. They almost here," yelled Hook. "I can't get loose of this shit, goddammit," said Lewis in a defeated voice. "Fuck," said Hook. "I'm coming." Hook had no choice, despite the fact that Steve and Isabel may not drop the threats headed at them. But Hook saw 3 beasts bearing down on Lewis. He didn't think he could see Lewis yet, but they would once they got into the yard. He hit the leading squatch in the head, sending it head over heels into the mud. He lined up on the next one and squeezed 2 rounds off, crippling the beast. It lay only feet from Lewis's position, writhing in pain from the .30 caliber wounds that had shredded its legs. The last one was in mid-air over the big rusty disc when Hook saw it again. It would land behind Lewis, but it would surely see him once he was there. So Hook ran from the porch, yelling and waving his rifle to get the creature's attention, hoping it wouldn't notice Lewis on the ground. He couldn't shoot, though. He might hit Lewis. When the creature landed and rolled to its feet, it stopped and looked back at Lewis. Hook was still running at the creature and saw where its attention was directed, and he raised his rifle and sent a round whizzing past the animal's head, and that got its attention. Hook caught a quick glimpse of Lewis on the ground. He had a pained and helpless look on his face. And when Hook had an angle on the squatch that wouldn't put Lewis in the line of fire, he snapped off 2 rounds, both smacking the beast in the chest, and Hook stopped and checked to see if Lewis had had a heart attack. "You okay?" Hook said. "Yeah." "You need some help?" "Yeah, if you don't mind." Hook swiveled his head toward Steve and Isabel and watched the last squatch leap for Isabel. He had dropped his rifle, obviously out of bullets, and with no time to reload, and had his knife out. It was a Bowie-style knife Hook had given Isabel, and the blade shined despite the lack of sunshine, and Isabel raised his body to take on the beast when Steve took it out. But still, it fell on Isabel, impaling itself on the knife. "Effie, what the fuck? I had him," said Isabel. "No doubt, Vato, but I had 1 bullet left. Figured I'd use it to save you." "The next time I pull this knife, don't shoot. Let me do my thing," Isabel screamed at Steve. "Oh, okay, I'm sorry." Steve looked for Hook and Lewis. Hook helped Lewis up and stood on the cable so that Lewis could break his feet free. "You see any more coming?" said Lewis as he was getting up. "Looks like we got 'em all," said Hook. "You sure you're okay?" "Damn, man, get me to the porch." Hook and Lewis were sitting on the old couch when Steve and Isabel walked up the steps. Steve turned and looked back to the field, and he was quiet for a while. They were all out of words, and they began to collect their wits. "Well, that was different," said Steve. "I guess the big rifle pissed 'em off," said Hook. "That's an understatement," Isabel chimed in. "What happened to you, Lewis?" Steve looked at him with affection. "Oh, Steve, it's the damnedest thing. It's the damnedest thing I ever seen," Lewis said while shaking his head. "It's those giant feet you have, buddy. I don't know how you even lift those boots off the ground. They're so big. It's okay. Shake it off. Everyone's okay and ready to fight. Now we got to figure out how to kill all these things." Steve still staring off into the field, knowing more were out there. The rain had stopped and the fog was fading, and Hook used the night vision goggles to look across the field again. He could see the trees, but the night vision would pick up heat signatures, and he saw 4 targets. "There's only 4 out there in the trees now. You think we've killed them all?" "Well, you just said there's 4 out there, so we obviously didn't kill them all," said Steve. Did you say the satellites were down? You said that, right? That's what Red told me when she called. Haven't heard from her since. Be worth calling her back and see if they fixed the problem, said Hook. I bet she'd let us know, said Steve. Hey, Hook, is that one out there moving? In the field in front of the junk where Lewis had almost died, a squatch moved. It was clawing at the mud, trying to get back to the tree line. It only had 300 yards to go, but still it was making an effort. Isabel got down off the porch. Each man had reloaded his rifle on the way back to the porch. Isabel had a full mag, and when he got close to the creature, the thing swiped at his legs with its big claws, missing him. And Isabel looked at the creature, trying to crawl, and he walked in pace with the monster, studying its features. His attention was drawn to the wounds in its legs. Nasty holes seeped blood and sinew, leaving a trail in the mud. It stopped and rolled onto its back, and it looked up at Isabel. He was repulsed by its mouth full of sharp teeth and its elongated muzzle. Its tongue came out and licked its teeth. The tongue retracted in a never-closing orifice, and Isabel thought about how uncomfortable it would be to have a skanky set of teeth like that. He shot it in the head and he walked back to the porch. Are we sure they're all dead? He said, sitting down in a rocker. I don't see any of them moving. They aren't hard to take down, said Hook. It's weird. I've never seen squatches go down this easy. Well, they make up for it in numbers, said Lewis. Those fuckers came out like a swarm of hornets. We need that thermal imaging from the satellite if we're going to stay after these things. It's not smart to go in there with no intel. I agree, said Steve, but I'm not sure what to do about that. Maybe this technology spoiled us. You know, we hunted these things for a long time without it. But you're right, something is different about these things. Something tells me they want to hunt us. Let's think this through. I mean, what pissed them off and made them come after the old man? He said something about traps, but he never said what happened. He just hit the high points. And they hung back for a long time after the old man and his family left with Angela, until you missed it a few with your 50 cal hook. That seemed to set them off. Well, then it's not rocket science, Steve, said Lewis. Every time we hurt one of theirs, they want some payback. Why is that so hard for you to understand? I think we just need to keep killing them until they're all dead. Steve thought about that for a minute and he said, yeah, I would go along with that, but Agatha said something about them coming through a door and that they would keep coming until the door was closed. Effie, I'm totally lost. Who is Agatha and what the hell are you talking about? A door? Isabel was trying to make sense of the conversation. Steve had not had time to explain his meeting with Agatha, so he got everyone up to date. I still don't understand what she means by a door, said Isabel. I guess we'll have to figure it out, said Steve. The men looked out over the killing field and they started counting and adding up the bounty so far. The number was impressive, bigger than any amount they had earned in their career as squatch hunters. Hook raised the field glasses again, looking for additional squatches that may have appeared, but only the 4 were there, pacing slowly in the trees. We still have 4 big ones we can see. How about I take 'em out with the 50? That might be all of 'em, said Hook. Why don't you hold tight, brother, said Steve, and he reached for a phone in his pocket, and he called Angela to make sure they had gotten the old man to the ER and that they had found a place to stay. A female voice answered, but it wasn't Angela. Julia told Steve that Angela had gotten her father to the ER, and they couldn't do much with the puncture wounds in his legs, so they started him on antibiotics and bandaged his leg, and then they discharged him. She said that Angela had gotten them a room at a local motel and had left to go get some food. Well, I'm surprised she left her phone, said Steve. No, she said that she's got 2 phones and that I could use this one if I needed to call anyone. Okay, said Steve. He didn't know she carried 2 phones. Who the hell carries 2 phones, he thought. Have you all had to deal with any more of those creatures? Asked Julia. Yeah, a couple, but they're not a problem. We'll have this wrapped up in a day or 2. You might have to stay there until we get it done, though, he said. Well, Daddy's feeling better and we're warm and safe. We didn't expect to be back at home right away. And thank you for helping us, sir. We'll talk to you later, said Steve, and he hung up. Steve had had relationships with women through the years. He had never made big commitments because of his lifestyle. It wouldn't be fair to a wife and possible children. He was getting too old to have children at this point, so that wasn't a concern, but he liked being single and having the freedom to do what he wanted when he wanted. When he parted ways with women in the past, he didn't make a dramatic or even an emotional scene. He just stopped calling them, dropped them like a rock. To him, there was no point in arguing over the situation. He had made up his mind and nothing would change that. Eventually, they would get the picture and they'd leave him alone. In his mind, relationships with women were enough work anyway to keep him happy because to have a relationship meant putting time in it, and he thought that Angela was one that didn't require an emotional high-maintenance effort. She was pretty, and that was a big part of the attraction, but she also appeared to be stable. There was no ex from the past that would give them trouble that he knew of, no psychotic sort of personality tics. She wasn't a closet meth addict, and so he fell into it with her. But with men like Steve Lilly, he could drop her on a thought and never think about her again. This phone bullshit was getting under his skin. He didn't care if she had another boyfriend. He wasn't a jealous man. Steve just dealt with honesty and truth. She was hiding something, and he didn't care what it was, but it reeked of another life and a secret that she kept from him when she had no reason to do that. Steve Lilly was halfway to walking away from this one like he had done a half a dozen times before, but he would give her the benefit of the doubt and wait. Maybe he was wrong and it was something simple, and he hoped that was the case. Steve had walked off the porch and into the yard while talking on the phone. To the others, he seemed lost and in deep thought. "Yo, Effie, you okay out there?" Isabel said. "Yep," said Steve. "What's the plan?" asked Lewis. "I don't have a plan," he said. "I don't want to walk us into the woods blind and get eaten by those things." "I'm popping these four with the 50, said Hook. He was impatient and raring to get in the fight and missed a squatch with the 50 one more time. "Hook, give me 10 minutes. You can shoot your big gun all you want. It'd be safer than going in there with them. But first, let me call the agency and find out what's up with the satellite." "Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you," said Hook. "Blue says he needs to talk to you." "Well, what does he have on his mind?" "Well, hell, that's the same question Lewis asked me today. I don't know, and I don't care. Said he needed to talk to you, that's all I know." And Hook walked inside to get his big rifle. "Hi, Mr. Lilly, how may I direct your call?" a woman said into the phone. Steve guessed she was 12 years old by her voice, but he knew better. "Agent Blue, please." "One moment." "Where do they get these phone answering girls?" Steve said. "They sound like grade school students." "I've noticed that too," said Hook. "I wonder who does the hiring." "Steve," Agent Blue said into the phone. "How's it going down there?" "The satellites must still be down," Steve said. "I assume you'd be watching this real time." "That's true. We think they'll be back online in the next 2 to 3 hours. We aren't the only agency that uses them. Everybody's raising hell about it." "I imagine so," said Steve. We've taken out several, but this hunt is really not a hunt. They're coming at us, almost like they're using military-style charges at this house. And we are still here, and there's no reason to move as long as they keep coming to us." "Well, that's not normal behavior for these creatures," said Blue. "Well, these aren't the usual creatures. There's something different about them. They're smaller and faster, and if they get a hold of one of us, they're probably more vicious. They have a muzzle, and it's full of terrible teeth. I've seen some with muzzles, but not with this set of teeth. They do go down easy, though. One shot takes them out of the game, so that is an advantage." "Okay," said Blue. "I want you to stand by until we get eyes in the sky again. We can assess what you're up against at that point. Blue waited for Steve's response. Yeah, it's dark now anyway. These boys hadn't had any sleep in a while. We may stay put until daylight. I hope you can get some intel by then. That's a good plan. Hey, Steve, I have something else for you, said Blue. All right, fire away. I know you remember Renee Tenzett and Tom Chatham. You know we monitor websites that make these creatures a topic, Blue started. Okay, what about them? Asked Steve. It's not a secret that they hate you and your crew for messing up their campouts at the Big Thicket and on the Hatchie River. Hell, that was a while back, said Steve. They still holding a grudge? I don't think it has anything to do with a grudge, but they do hate you. You cost them money, and that's all they're in this for. Lately, they've made several uploads to their website talking about a team in the Mid-South that hunts and kills the Sasquatch people. It's like they're the PETA of the cryptid world. Really weird. You know, save the Bigfoots. They're obviously talking about your team. Now, they will not confront you face to face, and they've been smart enough not to say your names. The information they've been putting out to their followers is vague, and they're teasing a bigger story. They've gathered quite a following, and their supporters are like rabid dogs wanting to know who they're talking about. Now, we think if they ever say your names, you're not necessarily in danger, but your team will be in for some harassment, and that's not good for business on your end or our end. I'm not worried about that, said Steve. Blue went further. They've partnered with a man in Canada to document what you do. His name is Stu Dishman. He has a website with the same rabid followers. He has sworn to his followers that he's going to reveal who you are and let your addresses out. If he does that, this whole thing could fall apart and we'll lose you as a team, and that means more people will be in danger. And by the way, deaths and disappearances from Sasquatch are way down since you've come on board a few years ago. I know you're getting paid, but you're doing great work and you're saving lives. I see, said Steve. If they find us and send people to harass us, we have ways to deal with that. It doesn't bother us at all. I believe you, said Blue, but I have bad news for you. Blue paused. The coordinates of where you are now have been given to Dishman, and we think he caught a flight to New Orleans and will be heading your way tomorrow. I don't know what he has in mind. Probably try to make videos of your team. He might even try to disrupt a hunt. He bragged about that in his latest video, something about saving the wisdom of the ancient people. These fuckers are crazy, but we can't stop him. They're all hustlers looking for anything to get clicks and make money off their websites. But if he shows up, and it sounds like he might, and if he documents any kills, well, that's a problem. Steve thought about it for a minute. If he jumps in these woods, these things will kill him before he gets 20 yards inside the trees, Steve said. If he's that stupid, then I say let him come on. Any documentation he gets will be destroyed along with him, but I don't think he's going to get any. So this is not a problem. How did he get the location? Asked Steve. You understand that we don't have the spying capabilities of other agencies, but we have friends who can get information for us. We called in a favor to find out who it is because it's critical to at least keep your operations low-key. And we have verified that the information was sent from a second phone number belonging to your neighbor and girlfriend, Angela. Steve stood on the porch, open-mouthed. He had no words, but Blue waited. Now he knew what the shady stuff with Angela over the last week had been about. His only thought was, when had she turned on him? Had she been there the whole time, like a spy, trying to get close so she could stab him in the back? But right then, it didn't matter, so he pushed it to the back of his mind. Blue's voice broke the silence. Now look, I know this is hard to hear, but we verified that she sent him the geolocation of that house last night. She must have gotten it from your phone and passed it on to Dishman. He could show up any time, so keep an eye out. I ain't worried about him, and I ain't shook up over Angela. And I can deal with her, and we can make life real hard on this Dishman person. "Roger that," said Blue. "You will hear from us the minute we have eyes in the sky. Good luck. You better get a big plane to fly all that money down here when we're done. It's going to be a big payday for this bunch of rednecks. I'll bring it myself, and we're happy to pay the bounties." And Blue disconnected the line. Steve walked into the house grinning. He didn't care what he was up against. Everything was always hard in this game. As long as he knew what he was dealing with, that was all that mattered, and his mood got better as he walked into the kitchen. "We're going to have a satellite image before daylight, boys. I'll keep watch while you get some sleep. Somebody relieve me in 3 hours." The team each found a place to get comfortable, and in 10 minutes, they were all snoring. Angela had not left the family at the motel to buy groceries. Instead, she lied to them and headed straight to the Louis Armstrong International Airport in New Orleans to pick up Stu Dishman. He was waiting on the baggage claim deck. "Hey, how long have you been waiting?" she asked. "Too long. Where have you been?" said Dishman. "Well, I've been driving here. You just told me to come get you a few hours ago. It's a 4.5-hour drive. Are you mad at me?" Angela asked. Her lip quivered. "Just get us to the site. I need to document these douchebags killing the Sabe people. Are we really 4.5 hours away?" "Well, yes," she said, "and I need to get gas, and then I'll get us there as fast as I can. Now, I limited out my credit card buying you this plane ticket, so you'll have to pay for the gas." "Are you kidding me? You know the government levied my bank accounts. All my PayPal money is locked up. I have a couple of $100 on me, but I can't waste it on gas. You're going to have to do something else." Angela was almost in tears. She had not experienced this side of him, and even though this was the first time they had met face to face, she was shocked at his behavior. Dishman had spent the last 4 months sending emails and talking with her over the phone. He seemed like the nicest guy, and she thought they had a romantic connection. He led her to believe that. And better than that, he acted like he was a successful businessman, bragging about the revenue from his website and the hundreds of thousands of dollars he had raised from average people giving money to fund a website and a podcast that he promised would rival the most popular Sasquatch websites in the world. That was 2 years ago, and none of that had happened. Until the day he had to report to his followers that the government had persecuted him by seizing his money for telling the truth about Sasquatch, a truth that he claimed the government would go to any limit to keep covered up. In truth, none of Dishman's accounts had been seized. He was a grifter, a self-made celebrity who had all the personality traits of a sociopathic cult leader. And people followed him in droves, and many still contributed to his promises of revealing the truth that the governments had held secret for so many years regarding the Sasquatch creatures. The money was still in the accounts, and it was growing each day. Another truth was that Dishman had never seen a Sasquatch. He repeated stories he had heard all his life and made himself the one who experienced the encounters. It wasn't that he didn't believe they were real. He was pretty sure that they were, but that didn't matter to Stu Dishman. This was like studio wrestling to him. The more he talked about it, the more believable he made the stories, the more money he made. He was good at this, and he knew it. Angela looked down at the steering wheel while they pulled away from the airport deck and said, "Well, I have a $20 bill in my purse, and I was saving that for food. I guess I can use that. But now I'm going to hold you to your promise that when your accounts are free, that you will reimburse me for everything, plus the $10,000 you promised me for getting you close to Steve Lilly's team. Find a gas station," is all he said. After filling the tank halfway enough to get them to Vicksburg, they headed north. The roads had not melted, and travel was sketchy in places due to the ice storm. Dishman sat in the passenger seat for the entire ride, looking at his mobile phone and never speaking to Angela. That's when she knew she had made a big mistake. The female coyote poked her head from the den and sniffed the air. The scent of the creatures had been there since she had taken the pig from the trap. They were close, and she didn't dare come into the open and give her den away. She backed into the den and settled in, and the pups began to nurse. The meal had restored her strength, and the pups were quiet as she waited patiently for the scent of danger to go away so she could hunt again. She instinctively knew she had a day, maybe more, before she would need to replace the calories being removed from her body by the pups. She closed her eyes and listened to the next winter storm begin, and the clicking of sleet lulled her into a deep sleep. Stay tuned for part 2 of The Open Door in Steve Lilly, episode 17.